All right. Well, thanks for the three of you for showing up. I'm going to be getting started here. So because the studio slots, having a slot open like this is, great to have, but we should make sure we're out of here on time. So welcome. This is lecture 15 of CSCI 5828, Foundations of Software Engineering. And today we're going to be continuing to talk about our agile software life cycles and be focusing today on iteration and release planning. So the topics are, when you're within a agile life cycle, what do you do to estimate the user stories that you have been generating, and then with those stories, use them to help plan out releases and iterations. And then once you're underway and you're actually working on an iteration, how do you measure and monitor what agile life cycles call velocity? And so we will define those terms as we're moving forward. So developers in these life cycles need to assign some sort of estimate to the story that they're creating. And as a reminder, user stories are a way of creating and documenting requirements in an agile life cycle. And as we discussed in lecture 14, they are typically very lightweight reminders of those requirements when compared to traditional software life cycles, and they're more heavyweight 200-page volume, 200-page long requirements documents. Instead, Agile likes to have these user stories be very briefly described, summarized on one. They typically will be put them on index cards to force themselves to be brief. With respect to what they put on there. The front of the card is supposed to have the requirement stated as succinctly as possible, and then on the back of the card some notes about test cases, and then on the front of the card you could also put notes about some details that you've discussed. But basically the user story is meant to remind ourselves that there's this requirement that we've discussed with the user, and if there's lots of questions or details that still need to be explored, you explore those via conversation with the user or customer. So once you've created those user stories, you then are in the position of having to assign estimates to them. Now the user and customer will not assign estimates to those stories. They will instead assign priorities. So they'll say, of this batch of index cards that represent all the features we've discussed, here are my top 5, or here are the highest priority features, here are the medium ones, here are the nice to haves, here are the not so, the okay, but we could let those slide if we need to. And so then the developers come in and give us the other side of this, which is, okay, this high priority story is huge. It's going to take us months. This medium story one is a 2-day job. And so we have to come in and some way give meaning behind those estimates. And so there are a number of desirable properties for this approach. One is that it allows us to change our minds about an estimate when new information arrives. So using these index cards, we're kind of acknowledging the fact that requirements are vague at the beginning of a development life cycle, and we don't know much about them. And so by keeping them at this kind of brief level that is supplemented by conversation, if we say, the first time that we look at the card, oh yeah, I think this is a 2-day story, and then we get started on it, and I ask a little bit of questions and suddenly reveal a whole another aspect to it that I wasn't aware of, we can be more flexible about having to change that estimate. We knew that we were making the initial estimate on not as much, or on a small amount of information that we knew would expand as we go forward. It works for both epic stories, stories that were really big, kind of large-scale stories that we know are already going to take many iterations to complete, and it works for smaller stories, because we can look at a smaller story and say that's a couple days. We can look at an epic story and say that's a couple of weeks or months. And so we can be fluid with what unit we use, and then also how confident we feel in assigning those estimates. It doesn't take a lot of time, so we want to spend our time mostly developing, and so this approach allows us to look at these things, come together as a team, and very quickly assign estimates to the various stories that are ahead of us. It provides useful information about our progress and the work remaining, because once we've agreed on the estimates, we'll start working on the ones that are the highest priority and have the smallest number of points assigned to them. And as we get them either completed or not, our progress comes up right away. We're not hiding our progress from ourselves. What's nice about Agile is that it makes the progress hard to hide from. It's something that's just up front, and we'll see some graphs that you create as you go through these processes that will show you how clear that is. It's tolerant of imprecision in estimates, which is good because typically people are making up estimates anyway, or you're doing guesstimates. Rarely do we have mathematical models that allow us to then make precise estimates. And so we know going in that we're saying this is about 4 days, it's about 2 days, it's about 7 days. And this will allow us to, as new information arrives or as we get work done, we can quickly update those estimates and move forward. And they're still flexible enough to plan releases. And we're going to discuss now the difference between releases and iterations so that becomes a little bit more clear. So the first thing that you have to struggle with as a team in the Agile Lifecycle approach is, what does a point mean? Different teams have different values for what that means. And in fact, some of them don't use points. Some of them just use, I've heard of people using T-shirt sizes. This is an extra large story. This is an extra small story, etc. But you need to come up with something and then standardize on it. And typically what a point will mean is that it kind of represents an ideal day of work, 8 hours of uninterrupted work for one member of the team. It might also represent 40 hours of uninterrupted work. It just depends on what what makes sense as a team. And usually we're more comfortable about work day. What can I get done in one day in these discussions? And so more likely we'll end up on the 8-hour point of the scale. And some use points to just represent complexity, so T-shirt sizes, lots of points equals complex, and little means simple. But what we'll do in this class is think of 1 point as one ideal work day, where ideal means a day with no interruptions, no meetings, everybody's there, no one's sick, no one's waiting on information, and we can just all work and be as maximally productive on the task. And so what's nice about this is that it keeps it, again, from bogging down in too many details that might slow us down. We don't need to get too specific. In terms of hours, we can just say this is a 3-point task, and eventually people understand that means 3 days. And we can say, yeah, that story's about 2 days of work. I'm pretty confident about that based on what I've done in the past. Now, one important point just to remind, I mentioned this in the Intro to Agile lecture as well, but it's important to have the team create these estimates, not to have them given to them by management. The team needs to look at the requirements and really talk it through. What does this mean with respect to the user interface? What does it mean with respect to the back-end database? How are we going to get these two to talk together? Do we have enough experience to do this quickly, or is it going to take us a while? Do we have to spike on some of the technologies? And so the success of the project is attributed to the team, not the individuals, and as a result, you really need to allow them to own the estimates. The estimates is something generated by the team. That's as an input to management, not the other way around. And then if you get it wrong, and you will, it's the team that failed. It's not one individual. And it's the team that has to then pull together and say, okay, what did we do wrong about this estimate? Why did we get it so wrong? And as a team, get better about creating better estimates moving forward. In addition, when creating and estimating stories, it may not be clear who will be assigned to a particular story. So what you want to do is to imagine the story being worked upon by anyone. Everyone has a chance to voice concerns about this particular story, and so they know that they'll have had a place to have provided their input. No, I really think this should be a 4-point story, guys. I don't think it's going to be as simple as what you're saying. And then again, the team is responsible if the estimate is wrong, and has to pull together to do it. Now, you might say this is, that this feels a little weird, that it's, as developers, I don't have these skills of making these estimates, and you'd be dead right. We don't. A lot of people don't have these skills. And what we've got to do is, what I like about Agile is that it forces us to go down this path. In other software development life cycles, it's very easy not to do all of this. And all of the concerns that are being surfaced by having the teams focus on estimates in this way are still there. They're just being ignored. They're just being put under the rug. And this really forces us to come to terms. How long is it going to take us to get this done? What can we plan for after we get this done? And really makes it something that becomes a topic of the conversation every day and something that we get better at as an organization over time. And so, yeah, if we start slipping, we start slipping, but we know about it day one of the slip as opposed to 30 days into the slip. Okay, so there's lots of different ways of doing the estimation. One way to do it was developed by Barry Boehm, and it's called the wideband Delphi approach. And basically what you do is you gather the development team, and you also have the customer who's going to be providing the details for the user stories throughout the life cycle. And if that's more than one person, then you have all of them there. You need to bring all those people together. And the first thing you're going to do is generate stories, and there's all sorts of techniques for brainstorming stories that we can talk about in a different lecture. But you'll be generating and brainstorming all the different stories that you want this system to have. And again, just think story equals requirement. So all the requirements we want this system to have. You get all of the stories that need estimates on and some blank index cards, and you start to distribute the cards to the development team. And then basically this approach says, loop until all stories have estimates. Someone reads a story out loud. And then you loop until estimates have converged. Engage in question and answer with the customers and users about that story. Learn more about it. What is it that we have to do? What are the corner cases? Is this story, this requirement you're giving me, is it always true? If not, what are the conditions where it's not true? And how does it change under those conditions? And you basically go in and do your requirements and analysis work on that story. Until you get to the point where the developer is able to write an estimate, where they can say, oh yeah, to do that type of functionality, you've got to hook up this database, do that kind of thing. Let me do 3 days on that. But you make that estimate in private. So all the developers make those estimates in private while the discussion's going on. But then when you're ready, the team turns over their cards to show everybody else what I thought this story was. And if you've got a well-tuned team, you're like, maybe a release in and a couple iterations in on this development, most likely you'll turn over and everybody will have the same estimate within a day or within a point or two. But at the very beginning of this process, and this is where you'll have to allocate some time for boot up and training, you might flip it around and one person says 1 point and another person says 10 points. And at that point what you have to do is discuss your differences. Why do you think this is a 10-point task? I think I can get this done in 1 day. What am I not thinking about? Oh, well, yeah, you've had experience with databases, but this is going to require scaling up to, and that's really hard to do. I'm worried that it's going to, not be as simple as you think, that kind of thing. So those types of stories come, those types of issues start to be raised. The team then discusses it. Maybe the person who did 1 point goes, oh, you're right, I didn't think about that. Okay, let's do this again. Everybody writes their new estimates, flip, and you continue like that until the estimates have converged within a point or two. And you do this for all such stories, because you need to come out of the meeting with estimates assigned to the stories. And once that's done, you're able to then start doing planning, both large-scale planning for releases and detailed planning for iterations. So one of the steps that, and I've kind of done this is, or discussed this, but one of the things you have to do in this process is triangulate. So after a set of stories have received estimates, so you've finished the process, everyone's got an estimate, you then should stop before you leave and put them all out and have everyone review. Were we being consistent? Maybe 2 hours ago at the start we were being too optimistic. We got more pessimistic as we were going on and more careful towards the end. And now we've got these 2 stories that are really the same thing. And over here we said 2 and over here we said 6. So let's make sure we're being consistent across all the top. So are these 2-point stories really all twice as small as the 4-point stories? Do we agree that we were being consistent? And then keep going and keep looping until you've got a consistency both within an individual story and then across the whole set of stories. And so then, as you get more and more experience, as you become more confident about what you are able to do each iteration, the need for triangulation may go down. You might just be converging and being consistent in the initial passes. And also, as you go forward, you will have done this kind of big Uber session where you're trying, at the very start, here are all these requirements, let's get them all estimated. As you move forward, you're going to be getting changes to stories. You're going to be getting new stories. existing stories are going to go away. And so as you do this in between iterations moving forward, you're going to be doing it for a much smaller set of stories. So it'll be, you finished one iteration, you're about to start another iteration. The user gave us 5 new stories, we got to get them estimated. And so then on those subsequent planning sessions, those will be much shorter, much more quicker, and you'll get into a flow on it. Okay, so then, though, in order to then set up our iteration planning and our release planning, one thing that we have to do is know what our velocity is. And the velocity has a very simple definition. It's just the number of story points that we completed in the previous iteration. So we had a set of stories assigned to this iteration, and let's say they totaled up to 40 points. At the end of the iteration, we finished 35 of those points. There was one story left of 5 points that didn't get done. So the velocity for the next iteration becomes 35. And that's how you do it. And so every time you go forward, you look at what we just completed on the previous iteration. That becomes our velocity for the new iteration. And so as you're moving forward, you might have already planned out at a high level what those next iterations are going to be. But now you've got a new velocity, you're going to perhaps adjust. Oh, we thought we were going to have 42 points for this iteration. We only have 35. One of these stories has to be pushed back. Which one does that? So you'll be doing some replanning as you go along. Now, Agile software lifecycles recommend that before the first iteration begins, the team just makes a guess at what their velocity will be. And if your point means ideal workday, you can start with a very simple formula, which is just to say how many days are in the iteration and how many team members do we have. And then multiply those two together, and that's your velocity. All right, so we're just going to say we're going to be optimistic here, and everybody can put in an ideal workday every day of this iteration for all of us. So you have 5 people, and your duration is 10 working days. You've got 50 points to play with. And so that becomes your velocity, and then you start to do your planning. And you just do that because you don't have any other information at the time. But at the end of the first iteration, 10 days from now, you'll know, oh, we were way too optimistic. There was that meeting, this person was out sick, that happened, this happened, we didn't know, didn't understand that, the customer was out. All those things come into play, and it turns out the actual velocity was like 30 or something. So then you plan that for the next one. So then, yeah, so if your velocity for iteration n is so then your velocity for iteration n is the actual number of points completed. And remember, in Agile, what completed means is you deployed it. Right? You finished it, and you put it into the working system, you deployed it, you showed it to the customer, and they can use it if they want. So complete means complete in the Agile lifecycle. So then if you completed 32 points in the previous iteration, your velocity for the next one is 32. Okay, so then there are 2 styles of planning within this context in which these stories and these points and these estimates all play a role. Oh, yes, question?
I actually have a question about points and velocity. So let's say for the previous iteration, you have like 30 points, and you get the velocity to be 30, right? And then you go to but then you only finish like 20 points. Then what happens to the velocity in the next iteration?
So yes, so the velocity is defined as how many points did we complete. Okay. So if we start, and let's say the previous iteration we did complete 30 points, then our time for this iteration is 30. And then we go in, and for whatever reason, we only complete 20 points worth of stories on this next iteration of 2 weeks. So then for the next iteration, when we're planning, our velocity is set to 20, even though in the past we had a velocity of 30. So we're always self-adjusting the velocity based on what we actually did the previous iteration.
So you don't do the assessment for the points in each iteration, you only do it at the beginning of the project?
So at the beginning, what you do is you say, okay, what's a good guesstimate for what our velocity is going to be? And then you do, you're going to do, as I'm going to discuss, release and iteration planning based on that guess. So you might say, okay, 40 points per iteration, and we need to plan out 4 iterations. So we take all of our things and we say, here's the highest priority stories. Those go into iteration 1, up to 30 points. The next set of stories go into iteration 2, always sorting by priority if we can. And we'll do 30 points for that, and 30 points, right? But that's just your initial guesstimate, okay? And so now you go through iteration 1, and 10 points weren't completed. So now those have to go into iteration 2, right? And now we know that, oh, here we'd planned 30 points for every iteration, but now we have only 20 points. That's our velocity. So what are we going to do? What are the 20 points we're going to assign to that next iteration? Now, there's nothing that prevents you if you then go into iteration 2 and you burn through 20 points really quickly and you still have 5 days. There's nothing that stops you from reaching and taking stories from the next iteration and bringing them forward. But you'd only bring it up to some reasonable number. You want maybe, okay, well, we used to do 30 in the past. We'll go up another 10 and see if we can get that done in the time remaining. But then, yeah, so if your velocity was 20, but you managed to finish 30 because you pulled some forward, then in the next iteration, your velocity goes to 30, and you replan, you reallocate. Okay. And what's nice about this is that you get this little heartbeat of planning in your process, which doesn't come up very often in the other life cycles. Again, the estimates are created at the beginning, and there's not much revisiting until problems arise as you go forward. Yes?
So when does the planning occur? Because a lot of times companies will say we have a 2-week release cycles. We have 2-week iterations.
Yeah.
But then if you spend time in that 2 weeks to plan for the next...
Yes, so there's overhead involved. So you have to decide how you're going to tack on that overhead. I'll talk about that in just a minute. We have one aspect of overhead implicit just by saying ideal workday, right? And we'll talk about that just next. But the other aspect of overhead is, so iteration 1 ends. When iteration 2 starts, is that right up? Is it the very next day? Or is it off a cycle? Is it off like a couple days? What do we do? What do we do as a team or as a company to give ourselves the time to do that planning? And either it eats into your time and you have to take advantage of that, so you have to take account for that, which means, oh yeah, our velocity really should be 30, but we have to spend the first day replanning. So our velocity is going to be 29, right? Or 29 times, or 1 times the number of team members, right? So you just have to be realistic. What's the point mean? We're losing that day to planning. So there was 5 of us, that's 5 points off. We're going to be losing 5 points to planning. Right. So, but again, it helps you. Once we start thinking this way and talking about this way, we will start having to deal with it. It becomes front and center as something that we deal with every day as we move forward. And these issues have to be wrestled with. Maybe you can do something where you just always have a built-in day for planning in your. That first day of the iteration is always planning and making sure everyone's oriented, and then we run. And that helps if you don't have days in between the iterations to do that type of work. Because Scrum will say at the end of an iteration you have to have time for debriefing. What went right, what didn't go right, etc. And then time for planning. And so that, it's got to come out somewhere. So yes, a day or two. And so you might see cycles be pushed where, officially Monday and Tuesday are not iteration 2. Iteration 2 starts Wednesday, right? And then you don't have these nice week boundaries for iterations, but that's just what happens. All right, so with release planning, a release is a version of the system under development that's going to be deployed and put into production use. So release planning in software development involves having a release roadmap in which the next several releases have been identified. So what are we going to do for release version 0.5, and then what's going to be 1.0, what's going to be 1.5, 1.1, whatever your version numbers are. But those are kind of major releases of the system, and those are each going to be developed over many iterations. And you might think of, for instance, these releases as having themes. This first theme is the, what's the minimum thing we have to support for this particular business use case. And then the next one's going to be the touch interface, or the mobile interface is going to be the next theme. The next theme is going to be having a strong web presence. Whatever it is, just to kind of help you orient and kind of do a bucket sort on all these requirements. You have requirements that touch on web stuff, and you know that the web stuff is going to be pushed off. The first focus is going to be a desktop app. Then you might, be able to easily put those stories out a couple of releases. And with a release roadmap, what you need to do is engage in release planning, which is, the customers assign priorities to your estimated user stories, and all stakeholders have to work together to say, what's our iteration going to be? Is it going to be a 2-week iteration, a 1-week iteration, a 3-day iteration? What's the iteration cycle? And that's what you do. You determine that when you're planning out your releases. And the issues that you'll be dealing with in this discussion, in this planning, will be what are our risks? If we're too slow, our competitors will beat us. If we're too slow, we'll lose customers to because they're complaining already about this particular problem. And also figuring out what's our initial velocity so that we can plan out these iterations. And so the prioritization scheme that you can have high, medium, and low. People have different rubrics for these classification schemes. One that I've seen recommended by one of the books I used last year was, rather than low, medium, high, have must have, should have, could have, won't have. And just get your customer to say, to use that as the way to assign priorities to these things. These are the must-haves. I got to have these by the time we get to release 1. These are the should-haves. I really, by the time we get to that release, these are features that people are going to expect. These are could-have, so not as high priority, but nice to have if we're there. And then won't have. I'm acknowledging as a customer that this particular feature is something we're going to put in a subsequent release. And this will then divides the stories into clear buckets that can then be used to assign stories to iterations within a release and across releases. And if a customer can't assign a priority to a user story, it's usually because the story has to be split further down. It's too high. It's one of these epic stories that's easy to talk about at a high level, but once you start really asking what it's all about, it's clear it just needs to be split and split and split. If you have a story that has tons of questions associated with it, it just means you don't understand it yet. And you need to have way more conversation. And as a likely result of that conversation, oh, you mean this and this. Oh, you mean this, this, and this. Right? And slowly but surely it will naturally split into things that suddenly have clear to-dos, clear priorities, clear estimates. Now, one risk that you have, and this is just because we're all human, is this question about what approach should Agile projects take? Should we tackle risky stories first, or should we go after low-hanging fruit? This is a well-understood, easy feature. We can have this done, no problem. Let's go after that. And that's fine. You can always do that, as long as you're not using it as problem avoidance. Like, I'm scared of this risky story. Let's just do all the easy stuff first. Typically, what you want, the sweet spot is high-value functionality, so it has a high priority, and you understand it. It's straightforward to implement. And that allows you to deliver value to your customer pretty quickly. So it's natural to go after that. And then this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing if you consistently do it so that the risky story is just put off until everything else is done. It's not a bad thing if what you're doing is you're acknowledging, yes, I have this high-risk story. I don't have enough information yet to understand how I'm going to tackle it. So one of my tasks this week is going to be to spike on a technology I think will help. Or we're going to have to go meet with this other organization to understand their angle on the requirement so that we have more information. So as you do that, slowly but surely the high-risk story becomes less and less risky, so we have more and more knowledge about it. Oftentimes, the risk just comes from the fact that we don't know. We don't have enough information. So if you're using that, if you're using this approach to go after the high-value functionality that's straightforward to implement, targeting low-hanging fruit, only because you're also doing due diligence on the high-risk stories a little bit each time, so they become less and less risky, then that's a fine balance. So that's the kind of the balance that you want to take. Just make sure you're clear on what the risks are, because such information may produce action items that can reduce that risk and make it feasible. Okay, so iteration length can be anywhere from 1 week to 4 weeks. In Scrum, they like to see it as short as possible, so that they will encourage you to just own the rapid development cycle and get in front of your customer more and more. But there are large companies doing big things. That doesn't necessarily mean that 1 week, in those companies, 4 weeks actually is a short amount of time. And so the life cycles tend to select on shorter lengths, but we've seen iteration cycles that go from 1 to 4 weeks. But the important thing is that once you've established the length, don't change it. So if your team has suddenly gotten used to 3 iterations of 2 weeks each, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going in there. You know, on other things we might call it muscle memory, where you're just getting into the flow. This is what I do every day. This is how my week evolves. This is how the iteration evolves. And if you get a team on that and they start to become productive, and all of a sudden you say, nope, the iteration is now going to be 5 weeks, or it's going to be 2 weeks, that can just be, have a huge impact and push back things as the team has to, suddenly readjust to how it goes. So arbitrary changes to the iteration length is not good and will actually hinder progress and hinder getting to the goal. So once you have all of these things, an iteration length, the initial velocity, and a set of prioritized estimated user stories, you can make initial ballpark predictions about how long it's going to take to create a release. And everybody knows, oh, we were making a guess on the iteration length, we were making a guess on the initial velocity. These estimates are all guesses, our best guesses with the information we have to date. So now when we say, hey, release 1 is going to happen in 3 months, we all know, yeah, okay, kind of 3 months, right? As opposed to it'll be done on December 30th at 5 p.m., right? Which makes management happy, but those estimates have just as much information going in as these estimates do. But once you have it, you can start to do things. You can say, okay, well, the number of points that we have to complete across all stories is 350. And our velocity is 40. So 350 divided by 40 gives us the number of iterations. And the number of iterations times your iteration length, number of days until release. Right, so once you've got these things established, then you can start to make some of these predictions about when we think we'll be done with the release, knowing that as soon as we finish the first iteration, our velocity is going to change. Right, and then we're going to have to replan and readjust. But then we're not just saying, yeah, December 30th is our release, and then blindly marching to it. We're saying, oh, wow, we got more done this first week than we did. Maybe it's going to be before December 30th. Oh, this is a really hard week. We've gotten behind. It's not going to be December 30th, right? But every time as you finish an iteration, we're all on the same page about how much progress has actually been made. Okay, so now, of course, I said previously we suggested that an initial velocity can be the number of team members times the number of days in an iteration. And that's a good formula for picking an initial velocity because you just got to come up with a number, and this is a good thing. We got 10 people, or we have 5 people here. If they all work a full day, and we've got, and there's 5 days in the iteration, it's 5 times 5, we have a velocity of 25. And then you can just move on to get other things done. You don't have to spend a lot of time hemming and hawing about it. But you have to take into account that our definition of point is an ideal day. And so what you want to also do is put in a conversion factor, which says, how do I go from an ideal day to an actual day? And an actual day, of course, won't be 8 hours of uninterrupted work. Just as I've alluded to, there's meetings that prevent us from doing the full 8 hours. You get interrupted. You have to go to lunch. There's illness. There's turnover. Suddenly you were a team of 5. And then someone goes to lunch with someone else and comes back and says, hey, I'm going to go to this other startup company. And now you're a team of 4. And that's a real risk. So the ideal velocity for 6 people with 2 weeks of iteration, 10 business days, is 60. But converting to an actual day, let's say you do convert to an actual day. Well, on an ideal day, I get about 4 hours of work done. All right, that's 0.5. In the conversion factor, your actual number of points is 30, right? Or maybe 0.25 if you want to be really pessimistic. Their actual number of points is 15. So what are you going to do? How do we go from this ideal workday to actual workday in our estimates? And then that gives us the actual number of things. And the whole point behind this is let's not hide behind how hard this is going to be and how long it might take. Let's try to be as realistic as possible. And we know right now we're dealing with some estimates, but after a couple of iterations, we're going to have a much better sense of what this team does each time, and that's really going to give us insight into where we're going. Okay, so the points-based approach to release planning can work well. It provides enough planning to make progress on the project. It lacks enough detail to avoid giving you a false sense of accuracy. People are going to be aware that there's errors in these estimates, and they can react once new information is available. In iteration planning, you need to engage in a little bit more detail to help create accurate work plans over the days that are allocated to an iteration. And so the way that this happens is an iteration planning meeting occurs sometime between iterations. And if it occurs, as we were discussing earlier, if it occurs during the iteration, then you have to include that in your estimate of actual velocity. Oh, that last day of the iteration, so we have a 10-day iteration, but day 9 is meet with customer, show demo, do the debrief, do the next planning. So we actually only have 9 days. And then the last day is the demo day and replanning day. So if you do that, then of course you have to adjust your velocity down by a point or two to account for it. But if you don't, if you let your iterations go off cycle with respect to the work week, then you would have an iteration finish on one day, the next day, maybe the next 2 days are planning, debrief, demos, whatever, and then the next iteration will launch at a pre-specified point after that. So again, all developers and customers should be present for an iteration planning meeting. The developers are required to help identify the tasks and make estimates. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And the customer and users required to answer questions, as always, about the stories. So the process for iteration planning involves, for every story in this particular iteration, again, engaging in Q&A with the customer, converting the story into tasks that need to be completed to finish the story, and then assigning each task to a single developer. Each developer then estimates every assigned task and performs sanity checking. And if a developer is overloaded, we start to do rebalancing and replanning. So, okay, so what are these tasks? Let me see if I say it on the next slide here. Yes. So tasks take a story that was written in customer user speak, right, from the customer perspective, and transforms it into the set of steps that the developer, finally the developer's perspective comes in. Oh, you want to be able to say, edit user. Well, what does that mean? Oh, I'm going to need a form. So I'm going to have, first of all, in some other story, we've created a form that displays all the users. Now I'm going to need a button on that form that allows the user to be selected to say, edit this user. I'm going to need another page that displays the user and allows their details to be edited. We should ask the customer what things can change on that page, because maybe their ID and their name can't change after we created it. So what are the constraints on this? But yeah, there's got to be a page there. Then when I click Save, I need to be able to make sure it goes through the middleware down into the database and gets updated in the appropriate way. What do I do to the old data? Is that archived? Is that, if it's not archived, is it okay to just lose it, maybe reconstruct it via log files? What do I got to do? And so finally, suddenly we get to talk in developer speak. Coding UIs, creating database tables, inserting data, manipulating data, performing, writing animations to make our UI look fancy, all that kind of stuff. So a user story, which is a customer perspective thing, a job seeker can search for jobs, say, if you had a website for doing searching for jobs, that could be transformed by developers into code the basic search interface, write a controller that will handle submissions from that interface and perform the actual search, ensure that that controller can access the database correctly, and write a view that then displays the results. And then a developer sitting there will say, okay, well, I know how to do views. I'll take that on, and I think that's only going to take me a couple of hours. Right? Someone else will say, okay, I'll make sure that the database is set up to take the old information and put it in an archive database, or at least create a log of what it used to be, so if we need to recover it, we can. And then I'll write the code that updates the database, and I'll put that API routine here. That'll take me, that's probably a day's worth of work, so it takes me 8 hours. Okay, and then I'll write the little Google-style search interface. I can just copy most of the things that are on the web. For that, that'll take me a couple of hours, right? And so people are weighing in on these things. What's the tasks associated with this story? What are all the tasks? What are the concerns? And how many hours do we think each task takes? And now this, of course, this step requires design thinking. It requires software design. What is it that we have to change about the existing system? Where does this code get isolated? What are the concepts we have to deal with? What's the UI going to look like? There's all sorts of analysis and design that'll go on. Your customer is right there. You could be sketching things on whiteboards to ask questions. You could be asking them for what gets changed, what doesn't, all during this task development time. So in release planning, we work with ideal days. So with task planning, we work with ideal hours. Once a developer has their assigned tasks, they estimate the number of hours it'll take to complete each one. They then add those hours up to perform a sanity check. Okay, so In an ideal iteration, I've got 10 days, that's 80 hours, and I have 120 points of task points. So this isn't going to work, guys. If everything goes right and I can work 8 hours a day, then I can do 80 hours worth of work, or 80 hours worth of work, and I got 120 hours worth of work. Who's going to take what? And you have to do rebalancing. So that's what the sanity check means is, and of course we're not dealing with ideal hours. We've got to have our conversion factor, what's our actual hours. So at an 80 hours work week, if we're talking about that overhead estimate of 0.5, that's 40 hours of actual productive work over those two work weeks. How many hours of tasks do I have there? So you compare the number of hours, length of iteration. If the number of hours to complete the tasks is greater, you're going to have to rebalance. That could include bumping a story, like, hey, now that we've tasked it out, there's no way we can do this third story or this fifth story. And that's got to be bumped. And of course, a team perspective is needed. Your management needs to be there to understand the discussion and why it's going the way it is. The customer has to be there to be able to say, oh, I don't think it's that bad, or, here's this requirement. Maybe I didn't explain it clearly enough. All those things are ideal in making sure that these tasks get the right number of hours. Okay, so then, once your points and priorities have been assigned, the releases and iterations have been planned, the most important metric becomes velocity. And so velocity tracks how much work is completed in iteration. Before the iteration, it's a guess. And it's a guess that we have increased confidence in over time. After an iteration, it's an actual metric that goes in to be used for assessment. How well are we doing? We thought we were going to do 30 points, we did 20. We thought we were going to do 20, we did 30. That's great, that kind of thing. So how do we measure velocity? I've alluded to it already. It's the number of points associated with completed stories. Incompleted stories are not included. So velocity is an integer, not a float. You don't say I have 25.5 as my velocity. So with velocity measured, we can chart our progress in a variety of ways. So for planned versus actual velocity here is one thing that you can do. You can say we had planned 20 points before iteration 1 occurred. And then when iteration 1 was done, we had done 18 points. And this is what we had planned for it, but this is what we actually did. So now our planned velocity becomes the same, and I'm sorry if that doesn't quite line up. It's meant to line up. So our planned velocity for the next iteration would be 18. But oh look, we did more. We actually got up to 20 points that one. So on the next one, our planned velocity is 20, and we actually did a little bit more than we had planned. And so you'll see if your team becomes consistent over time, that these two things will just kind of wobble up and down, but eventually kind of converge. That's what you'd like to see. If in one of these things you see a train wreck where planned was up here and actual was down here, you can't hide from it. There it is. That was a really horrible iteration. Now what do we do? Because now for the next iteration, the planned goes way down to this horrible number, and now we got to see what do we do as a team to be able to go forward on that. Another thing that people will do is to show planned versus actual cumulative. So you can see how many actual points we're completing over time. And so remember, the actual here is the completed story points. How much did we actually complete for iteration 2? This is what we had planned for iteration 2 by now, between both iteration 1 and iteration 2. But this is where we actually were when we add in both the stories for number 1 and for number 2, etc. And then, so these two are nice. These are kind of overviews of how the team are doing, and it's easy enough to plot them. The two that really help are the burn down charts. And so this one here is, it's called the iteration burn down chart. And what it shows is the points remaining. Okay, so at iteration 0, before we've started, we had finished our release planning, and we had finished planning the first iteration of the first release. And we knew at that time that we had 110 story points to finish across all the index cards, all the requirements that our user had given us, 110. So at iteration 0, before we start, that's where we're at, 110 points. So now we go through and we finish iteration 1. And let's say we actually got a bunch of work done. So let's say we did 20 points worth of work. So we should have seen that number be down at 90, right? So that would have been what would have been the ideal situation. But something happened. We discovered something. As soon as you start implementing something, all sorts of details become crystal clear in your head. And you go back to the customer and you say, hey, what was, I don't think we ever discussed this, and what about this? And now that I'm implementing it, this other issue seems like a concern. Oh, I forgot to tell you about this, and oh yeah, this is true. Oh, there's this one thing that happens every now and then, not all the time, but every now and then, right? So you have discussions, and even though you got 20 points worth of work done, they've added 40 points worth of work in terms of new requirements that suddenly became clear. And so in your burn down chart, even though you might have made progress, that's all lost by the fact that more stories were added. And so what you show is how many points are remaining, not yet completed in this graph. So the next one is the next iteration, and here, oh good, we got 20 points done, nothing was added. Or if there was, we got more than what was added, and we were actually able to make progress. Here, iteration 3, we did a great iteration, 30 points on that one. But over here, we still got work done, but way more work was added during that time, and we lost ground, 90 points remaining. And so this is where I say Agile doesn't let you hide from the schedule. Every iteration, you're looking at this burn down chart, and you're like, I just want to get it to 0, right? And but we keep understanding things, we keep finding out things that we're done, and all this happens in waterfall lifecycle models. This kind of ebb and flow. There's more stuff to do, there's less stuff to do, but rarely in those waterfall lifecycle models are the developers being shown this stuff in such a crystal clear way. And so this becomes a subtle motivator. I'm going to make it go down, right? That kind of thing. And the team pulls together. We can really make progress on this. We really like to see this burn down chart go down. And so now if, in your initial optimistic planning, which everyone acknowledges was based on guesstimates, release 1 was supposed to happen at the end of iteration 4, we can go back and see we lost ground here, we lost ground there, and that just put us off. We're planning on being done in iteration 8 or iteration 10. But it just becomes clear. It doesn't become hidden. And then within an iteration, you do the same thing with respect to the number of points that were assigned to that iteration. So within the iteration, you've got, say, now this, so suddenly we're switching to hours. So you've got story points. Those stories have tasks, and those tasks have hours. And in the daily burn down chart, what you show is how many hours of work we think are remaining based on the tasks that still have to be done. Okay? Now, this is where when you first do this, you might be wildly off in terms of your estimates. Slowly but surely, it'll get better over time. But this chart is exactly the same as the iteration burn down chart and what it's trying to show you. You have, instead of, it's exactly the same in the type of information it's showing you, but its values, the axes are different. So this here is story points, and these are iterations for the iteration burn down chart. And for the daily burn down chart, it's hours remaining, and it's number of days for your iteration. So most iterations, a 2-week iteration would be 10 business days, 5 business days for a 1-week iteration, etc. And so here, as you're going day by day, you'll see, are we going to get to 0 by the end of our iteration? And there's all sorts of styles of things that you see. I've seen in the past when I've had students do turn in their burn down charts. It's usually a straight line across here until it gets to the last couple days, and then suddenly it somehow leaps to 0 at the very end. But what you'd like to see in good agile work where people are steadily working, steadily making progress, is a nice kind of diagonal line down to the bottom. That's what you'd like to see. But maybe get ahead a couple days and you see a drop, and then it's staying here, and then we realize there was something else we need to do. Our estimate was wrong, so it goes up. And then we come down. There's all sorts of things you can see. And as you get comfortable with these graphs, they tell a story. Oh, midweek, something went wrong. They stopped making all progress, or they found out something new, and the number of hours shot way up. And that way okay, we're not going to stop the iteration and replan, but we know now 2 tasks are not getting done. 2 stories are not getting done. We're going to have to bump those but let's get these other ones done, right? And so you can rally and try to get that done. You don't get to 0 because you're always going against what was planned for the iteration. You don't want to keep making your goals change mid-iteration. Stick with your targets in that iteration. But slowly but surely, it starts to tell you the story over time, and you get used to it. It becomes a kind of an ambient motivator in the environment. Yes?
So when you see the bump that goes up for your hours, does that mean that you figure something out and you readjust the number of hours that task will take?
Yes. So here what you're doing is you're acknowledging that perhaps a task, we didn't give it enough credit, and we initially gave it 2 hours, now there's 3 hours on that one. Yeah, so you're re-evaluating the task estimates. The other thing that can happen is, we thought that there were 6 steps in this story, and there are 10 steps. So those 4 steps need to have hours associated with them. Those 4 new steps, new tasks, need to be estimated, and that goes into this daily estimate.
So does a team then get back together, re-estimate, or do you individually, because you're working on that task and you realize that just wait?
It can happen, yeah, it can happen by an individual developer going, whoa, I was supposed to be done by now, I'm not done, it's going to be another 4 hours. So they just change it in the system, and it, like if you're using a system like Rally software, you can go into your assigned tasks and change the estimate, and then it will percolate to these graphs. Or you're doing it manually, labor-intensive way on a whiteboard. The developer gets up from their desk, walks up, changes the estimate in front of everyone. It's like, hi guys, I just realized, that kind of thing. It could just be conversation among people and someone updates it, but yes, you update it midstream. And that's why, I show them every now and then. Hopefully I can find it really quick. There are companies, Panic is one of them, that does custom dashboard software. So they basically give you software that lets you plug in your own metrics, and then it's designed to go up on big screen TVs so that you can very quickly plug in things that you want on the wall for your development team to see. And they every now and then they will show their own status board. And they've got a couple of sweet graphic designers on their team, so it always looks cool, makes people feel inadequate. I wish my status board looked like Panic's status board, but this is what they have in their own offices. So 25 days until iPad launch. We don't know what this means for them, but they're apparently up on some common metric that's always displayed here. They've got all their products. So this is a company which has multiple products. They've graded these out because these were teasers. We're working on new stuff, by the way, right? So they're always doing their own little cool social media advertising. But they use their own product, and they make this available for other teams as well. Okay, let me just remind myself. Yeah, so I actually burned through this particular lecture pretty quickly. We'll probably have to end early this time. Yeah, so that is the charts. Now, for the presentation assignment, as you might remember, there were students who said, I really wanted to come to this class to take and work on a project together. And so what I did in the presentation assignment was said, you can drop one of the 5 presentations or 4 presentations and make it 3 presentations plus a project. And what I'm giving you is 3 weeks to do that project. So what you would have is a release is going to be 3 weeks, and your iteration is going to be 1 week. And so during that time, which I'm recommending you do starting, what was it? So we just had a presentation due at the end of week 6. So we're starting the second cycle of that, 7, 8, 9. So then starting week 10, if you do the project, weeks 10, 11, and 12 will be the time to do that project. 3 weeks, 1 week iterations. And what you would do is you'll have a chart like this that'll, once you've decided what you're going to be building, you've got your stories, you've estimated them, you'll have your story points. You'll have a 3-cycle iteration burn down chart. And then in your iterations themselves, you'll have 5-day, or you can even make it 7-day, depending on what your team wants to do. But you'll have a 7-day burn down chart, one for each of those weeks. And so what I'd like to do is give you the opportunity to see how this works for you. Track your progress this way. Force yourself to look at a story that's a requirement for a system you guys have agreed to build in 3 weeks, and totally acknowledging 3 weeks is not enough time, is not a lot of time. But I've seen student teams that, I've given them an 8-week semester. They spend a couple of weeks, dilly-dallying, and then they get serious. And they end up doing about 3 weeks of work anyway, where they're fully working on the project and making progress. So it is realistic from that regard. There should be some planning going on before you start that iteration, so as soon as iteration 1 begins, you can start making progress on it. And what you want to do is identify a system that you can build. In the past, what students have done is they've built web services. I've seen ambitious teams of 5 students do something where they've had 1 student work on the database, 2 students work on a web service, and 2 students work on a mobile app that uses the web service. And so at the end of the semester, they had shown me a little mobile app that pinged a web service that they had implemented, put up on Heroku or something, and they each had kind of a clear delineation of tasks. But what I asked for in the past when I had a full-fledged semester project was something that involved concurrency in some way. And so I think I put that in there but I'm not going to hold you to that. It's 3 weeks. So, but come up with some system you'd like to build. And it can be just something simple, a web app using Ruby on Rails. It could be a mobile app on Android, a database app, whatever you want. But come up with it and start to add. So based on your team, start to add enough features that you all will have enough work to do across the 3 iterations. And so these would be some of the charts that you would make while you're working on that. And so this lecture then would become something useful for you in terms of planning for that project in that kind of time period of weeks 10 to 12, which is to be performing your release planning and iteration planning, say, week 9, so that you're ready to launch on week 10. And just to make clear, you don't have to do this. So if you want to, you can just do 4 presentations and not worry about doing this semester-style project. So in executing an Agile lifecycle, all of them require you to estimate your stories, plan your releases, plan your iterations, measure your progress. And what we've done this lecture is looked at various recommendations for how to do these tasks, using ideal days for your stories and ideal hours for your tasks, and then coming up with some conversion factor to get to actual days and actual hours, and use some charts to measure your actual process as you go through these things. And again, when you're trying to complete a story, you're going to be doing a whole vertical slice of the system. What's the feature that needs to be involved? What's the UI that has to put that on the screen? What's the middleware that accepts the events? What's the back end that's updating a database or a file with respect to the model that's being updated by those actions? And so you will probably, in this short 3-week project, find that you'll spend a lot of time just bootstrapping yourself, getting to understand what it's going to take to get a story all the way finished. And so don't let that demoralize you. Just embrace it as a way to learn what this style of work actually means. It becomes really easy. It's human nature to want to say, okay, yeah, I'm done on that. I'm done. And not get the story all the way over the finish line to the point where you can say, yeah, it's done. I was able to build it on my machine, deploy it to our GitHub. All of my team members downloaded it. They all used the feature, and it didn't break. It's done, right? And then you can move on to the next story, the next task, that kind of thing. Now, on these very short, for your semester project of 3 weeks, your features, you might have what are like 3 major things you want the system to be able to do, and then lots of little things, lots of bells and whistles that you can do. So your stories are going to be somewhat imbalanced. There's going to be like the overarching goals, the epic stories, and those will quickly decompose into much more smaller feature statements. And then it'll be quite easy to go from the feature statements down into the tasks. And from there to hours and planning. But force yourself to embrace this planning process. I think you'll learn a lot in embracing it and doing it. All right, and as I'll say, Agile life cycles are brutal. If you fall behind, you know it fast, right? But it's also really, really good in the fact that now schedule delays don't spring on you. And suddenly everyone's surprised, oh, what, we're not going to make it? Everyone knows going on where you're at, what you're doing, the customer's involved, they're seeing what's going on. You can explain to them why this particular thing happened. We didn't understand this. We needed someone new for this, all that kind of stuff. It just comes to the forefront rather than being pushed off to the side. Okay, so I managed to get through this lecture ahead of time. What we're going to be doing next so in terms of the logical stream of lectures, the next lecture is going to be a midterm review, and that'll happen physically 9:30, probably back in this studio again on Thursday. If you can't make that time slot, just send me email, and I'll at lecture today, I'll be reminding people to send me questions in time for that. I had been thinking about inserting one more homework assignment before the midterm, but I've decided not to do that. So after we get done and past the midterm, I'll roll out one more homework assignment. That what I wanted to do is to force students to actually try Clojure and do a simple concurrency problem with that, but I'll push that off until after the midterm. So coming up is just getting ready for the midterm itself. That's going to be happening week 9 on Tuesday. So, okay, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, guys. So now I'm sure that my lecture today at 12:30, that one, I've got someone that's coming to review my teaching, and he would like to have time at the end of class to speak with the students. So I know I'm not going to get through those slides today. So then on Thursday, I'll have to try to finish off those slides, plus get through the lecture that logically comes before this one.
So, do you have that lecture? I don't see it on GitHub.
Which one? No, because all I had time
Was
just
this, no,
just
no
this
problem.
morning to get the one up. But yeah, I'll put those slides. I've got time now, but before 12:30 to get the other sets of slides up.
No, I just.
So I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I put it into my OneNote, so I take notes.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I'll get those out. In fact, just in the next couple minutes.
Okay.
All right. See you at 12:30.